really exciting set of webinars over the course of the next 5 weeks, dropping every Monday around about 4 o'clock. We're going to be looking at your amazing brain, and during this recording I'll be talking you through the first part of the course, which is about well-being as a skill. And then every Thursday at 4 o'clock throughout those 5 weeks, we're going to be getting together online and chatting about the content of the webinar, answering any questions, helping you with your homework. Don't worry, not massive amounts of homework, no stress related to the homework. The homework is all about trying out some of the ideas that we talk about, building some of those habits in, because it's the opportunity for us to change ourselves. This is all the stuff that you were never taught about your amazing brain, all the stuff that we absolutely should know about as teachers supporting young people, and actually children themselves should know this, and so should their parents. And that's what we do at Action Your Potential. That is our mission, to help everyone become a neuro ninja. In your case, a neuro ninja, newly qualified teacher. But for all the people that we work with, becoming neuro ninjas is about living in our brains and understanding ourselves from a new and exciting perspective, a perspective that wasn't really available to us, say, 15 years ago. We've learned more about the human brain in the last 10,000 years than we have in the last 10 years. We've learned more about it than we have in the last 10,000 years. So it's incredible what we know about the brain now. So today's focus is on well-being as a skill, or the subtitle is "Why Has Nobody Told Me This Stuff Before?" And so well-being, how we're feeling every day, we're going to explore in a great level of detail. We're going to give you practical suggestions to improve your well-being and to support your students when we're back at school to do the same. Hope you're all okay. We'll also address during the course of this webinar issues around how we might all be feeling at the moment and how that might be related to some of the ways that our brain kind of operates. So our focus today will be on supporting your well-being and mental health during this complex time. We'll be looking to support your development as a professional going forward with some of these key ideas about how the brain works, with some practical activities for you to use in your own daily experience, things called daily life experiments. They're basically tweaks and habits that we can build in. We're going to offer you strategic and professional skills and knowledge that will be beneficial for you in your future in education, and obviously to enable you to complete your NQT development with some deep transformative knowledge about the brain. So my name's Andrew and I work at Action Your Potential. In normal times, when we're not all locked down, I'm in schools in the evenings talking to parents and students together, in the daytimes talking to teachers passionate about the human brain. And our company, Action Your Potential, has now got the privilege to work with about 70 different educational organisations across the southeast of England. So that's us. Do follow us on Twitter or YouTube. We put lots of information out all of the time about how to get the most out of your amazing brain. And that's me, previously a deputy head at Uckfield College, before that Peacehaven Community School, been in East Sussex education for about 25 years, 15 as a senior leader, deputy, acting head teacher, trained Senko. Forget all of that though. I'm a nerd. I'm a brain nerd, and I'm really passionate, as you'll get, about the brain and what it tells us about ourselves. And actually, once we understand ourselves in a different way, how we can get more out of ourselves and more out of our children. And that's our company. So today's webinar is all about focusing on this key idea that well-being is a skill. Who knew that well-being is a skill? It's not just luck, actually. It's down partly to what we do every day. And I'm going to explain why and how that links, and give you some homework supportively to carry out into your next 24-hour period, and then the next 24-hour period after that. It's about building habits. So it's about going from a brain slave, following the programs built into our brain, to becoming a neuro ninja, which sounds quite cool, but I'm a nerd, so it's not about being physically a ninja. It's more about being intellectually, cognitively, emotionally agile and ninja-like, responding rather than just reacting, because some of the ways our brain just reacts can be upsetting and can actually distressingly amplify our psychological suffering. that kind of narrative we get caught up in, that view that we have of ourselves as a certain kind of person, rubbish at certain things, good at some things. That stuff is kind of okay, but it's actually not exactly correct, because we can change ourselves from the inside out. But more on that in a later webinar. So think of yourself not just as attending a webinar or engaging with some professional development material. You're joining a movement. You're joining hundreds of fellow professionals, hundreds of parents across the Southeast that are learning how to be a neuro ninja. And this will lead us to think about school in a different way. Because if we think about the whole brain of the whole child for the whole day, then unless we connect parents, students, and teachers together inside a common understanding of the brain, we're missing a massive trick in education. 85% of a kid's life in normal times is outside school, just 15% in school. So however brilliant your lessons are, however fantastic the homework support is, unless that student takes that learning and uses it, protects their sleep, looks after their emotional health, all of those sorts of things, then there is a huge issue in terms of them remembering it. Recall and retention. 70% of the brain's experience is dumped by the brain the next day. It is a design feature for the brain to forget most of its experiences day to day. So it's really important that we link everybody up, and that is our mission. We are passionate about it. Linking up schools, teachers, students, parents. So everyone's thinking about the whole brain of the whole child for the whole day. And on this NQT course, the whole brain of the whole teacher for the whole day, and understanding ourselves in a new and different way. And I want to convince you and excite you and enthuse you with this notion that you've got everything you would ever need for your whole life at the top of your neck. This incredible biological machine that's evolved over 4.6 billion years, 86 billion neurons, 10,000 possible connections across every neuron. And that means trillions of potential connections across our living dynamic brain that changes throughout our lives. So we're living in this privileged time of a neuroscience revolution when it's going to change, and already it is changing, medicine, education, and we're part of that kind of wave of change. And the criminal justice system, everything about ourselves, we are going to rethink in relation to what we understand now about what goes on inside the brain. So let's inspire you by seeing the impact that neuroscience is already having in medicine. This guy is an ex-Royal Marine and has been suffering from Parkinson's disease. And the outcomes of neuroscience research have led to these sorts of medical interventions.
With your stimulators off, I just want to mark what your tremor is like. Okay, you happy for that to go ahead?
Yeah.
Right then, with your right hand, if you possibly can, touch your nose, touch my finger. Okay, and the real test. Do you think you could pick that up for me? Right, okay. Should we switch it on? Okay.
Ah,
All right.
ah. That's it.
Does that feel better?
That feels good.
Should we try and do these assessments again? With this hand only, and with your right index finger, touch your nose, touch my finger.
Oh, that's weird.
Okay, you all right?
It's amazing.
Good. You all right? Yeah. Can you try picking that cup up for me with your right hand? Well done.
It's incredible. That is amazing. That is an amazing change. For him to even just drink is great.
That deserves a round of applause.
Never ceases to move me, that video. Incredible. So we're able to support that guy by putting a little stimulator in his brain and generating dopamine because his brain cells are no longer producing it. So let's focus briefly on our current predicament, the kind of international pandemic and the impact it might have had on all of us. And if we stand back far enough from the human brain, we can understand the kind of collective response with a little bit more nuance. So how are we all? You might have found yourself feeling much more of this recently. You know, I'm recording this on the Monday just after Boris Johnson's done his latest update to all of us from 7 o'clock last night. And I'm feeling some of this stuff again now. So when he first spoke to us on the 23rd of March, I certainly felt this stuff quite strongly, and I'm feeling it again now. And I know where it's coming from. It's coming from a part of my brain that really looks out into the world and tries to work out what's going to happen next. Our brain is a prediction engine. It's constantly looking out into the world to try and work out what's going to happen next. And when it can't do that, how does it make those predictions? It makes those predictions based on our previous experience. But when it can't work out what's going to happen next, we experience uncertainty in our brain and feel that as anxiety in our minds. And so you might have found yourself experiencing some of these emotions far more than perhaps normal. You might have been snappier, more emotional. And that's because an area of our brain has spotted this massive change, and we're experiencing that as uncertainty. And we feel that as anxiety, because if a brain can't work out what's going to happen next, we're going to need to respond to that situation. And for our ancestors, uncertainty often meant, is that a predator over there? Is that tribe over the hill going to come and attack us? So we have these very strong emotional responses to those feelings. So that explains perhaps some of the hoarding behavior that we've seen, the collecting of toilet roll, rice, pasta, etc., that we certainly saw in March as people kind of panic bought ahead of a lockdown, you know, completely and totally unhelpful in a modern economy to kind of strip mine the supermarkets of this stuff. But actually, it's just the basic programs of the human brain responding to threat and uncertainty. So when we understand ourselves from a different perspective, we can look at these things in a different way. And as we go through these webinars, we're going to be focusing on these key ideas. And our key idea, when you see this symbol, it's a key idea being introduced, is an idea about the brain based on neuroscience evidence, psychology evidence, that once we adopt it into our lives can really help us understand ourselves differently and work in a different way inside ourselves. So being a neuro ninja NQT means engaging in a revolutionary shift in thinking about the way that we are. And that shift will enable us to think about students differently, the work that we do differently. And that greater insight will mean that we'll be able to develop our practice to be even better. So a paradigm shift is a way of thinking about ourselves in a different way. And if we can change our paradigm, we actually open up different ways of thinking about ourselves. We're literally widening the frame with which we view ourselves. And so that means that we can think about our students in a different way as well. We can think about SEN in a different way. We're all neurally diverse. We've all got different structures in our head because of our experiences. As our brains build from our genes, interacting with the world, they build very intricate structures of neural architecture. And that neural architecture is different for all of us. That means we're all neurally diverse. We've all got neurally diverse profiles that mean that we've got some skills that are developed in us, more natural talents in particular areas, and more deficits in particular areas. So some of us might be good at writing or maths or dance or physical sport, whatever it is. Some of us will have deficits in some of those areas as well. And so we need to be thinking about children and their brains in a different way, in a paradigmatically shifty way.
I have a lot of memories from when I was a child. One that's always stuck out to me, though, was when I was about 10 years old and I was in school and I struggled. And I didn't struggle with English, math, or science. I struggled holding still. And I would try to listen and focus and process ideas, but I couldn't help myself. And to be honest, I would sit there and then I would just start tapping. And the students in the class would look at me and they'd say, "Hey, stop tapping." A lot of the time, I didn't even realize I was doing it. And then eventually even the teachers got after me and they would yell at me and they'd say, "Clint, you have to stop tapping." It got so bad that I got sent to the principal's office for tapping. And he said to me, "Okay, maybe when you go back to class, just try sitting on your hands." And so I did. I went back to class, and when I felt myself starting to tap, I did this. I sat on my hands. And that worked for about 5 seconds. One time I was tapping in class, and my teacher, Mr. Jensen, he looked at me and he yelled. And he said, "Clint, stay after class." And I thought to myself, this is it. I am done. Now, I've always been the type of person that believes that a single moment in time can change a person's life. And this was one of those moments for me. And I will never forget it. And so I was sitting there with Mr. Jensen and an empty classroom. And he walked past me and he sat next to his desk and he said, "Clint, come here. I want to talk to you." And as he looked me right in the eye, he said, "Now, I need you to know something. You're not in trouble. But I do have just one question that I have to ask you." And he asked, he said, "Have you ever thought about playing the drums?" And in that moment, Mr. Jensen, he leaned back and he opened the top drawer of his desk. And he reached in and he pulled out my very first pair of drumsticks. And he held them in his hands and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, Clint, you're not a problem. I think you're a drummer." I've never put those sticks down. I've toured, recorded, and played drums all over the world. My whole college education was paid for with drumsticks in my hand. Just because of a single moment in time when somebody believed in me and he saw something in me that I didn't even see within myself. And from that moment, I learned that there's a difference between being the best in the world and being the best for the world.
So there's this new world available for us to understand ourselves in a new way, to be the best for the world, the best teacher, the best people for the people that we care for in our lives. So how do we see ourselves in this new way and our students in this new way as well to get the full benefit of the neuroscience revolution? Well, it starts with a really simple idea we're going to come back to again and again. It's a very simple idea, but quite a complicated one in terms of the detail that underpins it. Our brain builds our mind. That is it. Our brain builds our mind. So the circuits across our brain connecting up in the morning as we emerge from sleep inertia, that builds our self. And the quality of that self every day is going to determine our ability to learn, our ability to make progress, everything. And so we really need to attend to the contents of those connections, the way that the brain kind of connects up, the health of the brain and the body, because the brain isn't always that good at spotting what its problems are, what its issues are. It gets caught up in stories that aren't true in its own head. So how do we build that best version of ourselves? How do we rock up as the best version of ourselves every day? Well, we think about the brain as a projector and the mind we get to live inside as the image generated by that projector enables us to see ourselves in a new way. So half of how we feel every day is down to what we've done in the previous 24 hours. The other half is down to the genetics that built the neural architecture in our heads, and obviously the experiences we had, the learning we've experienced, whether we've had trauma, whether we've lost people, whether we've recovered emotionally, whether we're carrying emotional pain. But half of how we feel is down to what we do in the previous 24 hours. And that's what we're going to look at today. And obviously we'll focus on that a little bit on the webinar on Thursday at 4 o'clock. We live in this gorgeous wet mess, 3 pounds of matter, the most complicated bit of matter in the known universe. And this is what it needs us to do every day to build the best version of ourselves, for all those circuits to connect, for the neurotransmitters to be in the right place, for the neurons to be well rested. We need to do these 12 activities every day We can't scrimp on them. This list is a list of deliberate rest. If you look at that list, you might think, oh my God, that's an awful lot to get done. But if you look at the list again, a lot of them happen naturally: eating healthily, sleep, learning, walking outside, a bit of exercise. They're all free, but they all have massive impacts on the physical structure of our brain and the quality of the mind we get to live inside. And so we're going to look in a bit more detail at some of these rocks now. I'm going to pick out some of this from the list here, but also we're going to delve deeply into about 3 of them. Let's look at rock 11 briefly, because that's a little bit confusing. Engaging activity is important to your life purpose. What do we mean by that? What we mean is that each brain, as we saw just now, is different. Every brain has got skills, and every brain has got deficits. We're naturally different from each other. That's one of the successes we've got as a human species, the different skills and ability that are built in the structure of our brain. So we might be better at maths or reading or whatever it is. We've got skills, and it's really important to enable our brain to enjoy and engage in the things that it likes to do every day. So a little bit of a hobby and an interest that connects all of our brain regions up in a psychological experience called flow after Csikszentmihalyi. You've probably come across Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Hungarian psychologist's idea of flow, where we get lost in whatever we're doing. That's what rock 11 is, flow experiences. It's really important to make sure we've got those experiences and all those other ones as well. So the thing I want to urge you to do, and the homework's related to this as well, if you feel wonky at any point, if you feel under the cosh, stressed, etc., look back at this list first before you get caught up in lots of dialogues and internal narratives about something that's going on in your life. Just look at that list and make sure that you're doing those things. They're mandatory to build the best version of ourselves. And self-care is not an indulgence. In order to be the best version of ourselves, we must do these things. So what do the rocks do? Well, 9 of them turn on our natural calming down system. Half of our nervous system, called our parasympathetic nervous system, calms us down. There's a nerve running down the back of our brain all the way to our intestines called the vagus nerve. When we deep breathe, we turn on our parasympathetic nervous system. And 9 of those rocks hard reset our parasympathetic nervous system, calming us down. The 12 rocks connect diverse brain areas and circuits across the brain, giving every circuit an opportunity to connect and talk to every other circuit. And they help particularly balance 2 brain networks: the cognitive network directly behind our forehead in our prefrontal cortex, and the emotional networks much more deep in our brain. They need to be well integrated. There needs to be lots of communication between them. And that list you can think of as deliberate rest, activities that you partake in to build the best version of yourselves every day. And that physiological brake pedal, the parasympathetic nervous system, turned on by 9 of those rocks, is a really important response to the low level incoming stress of the 21st century. You know, beyond the pandemic, just a normal 21st century experience. GCSEs, deadlines for NQT assignments, all of those things generate lots of stress because there's lots of uncertainty. Will I pass my NQT year? Will my year 10 behave themselves? That's just in normal times. You add in the additional amplification of stress and uncertainty of a pandemic, and you can see how easy it is for our accelerator pedal, our sympathetic nervous system, to get out of control. And that sympathetic nervous system is our go system. It's our flight, fight, freeze response, which is perfectly good at dealing with lions and tribes over the hill like our ancestors had to deal with, but not with dealing with incoming messages in email or uncertainty around pandemics. That can trigger our fight, flight, freeze response. And actually, that's totally unhelpful, because we're going to need our brains to deal with most of the incoming in the 21st century. All of our brains integrated, not just our emotional brains and our adrenaline and our fight, flight, freeze response. So turning on our parasympathetic nervous system every day is so important for good mental health and balance. And these are other ways that you can turn on your parasympathetic nervous system. You can do a grounding exercise, connecting with 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can touch. You can run your fingers over your lips, but I wouldn't do that in company. It looks a bit weird, but there are parasympathetic nerve endings in your lips. So nobody told me about this, the ability to calm ourselves down. We can literally reduce our pulse rate by deep breathing. Try it. Take your pulse and then deep breathe for a minute and then take your pulse after, you'll see a drop of maybe 10 or 15 beats per minute. And that's what the rocks do. 9 of them turn on your calm down system. So let's look quickly at 3 of rocks in detail. This is sleep. Look at what it does. These are all the physical, mental health benefits of a good night's sleep. 7 to 9 hours. And I know from all our work across thousands of people, across 70 schools, that sleep is a massive issue for lots of us. So sleep is a really important rock. Look at what happens to our bodies and brains if we get less than 6 hours sleep. 30% less memory the next day. How important is that for us to know as teachers? More anxious the next day, more emotional the next day, more socially clumsy the next day, and how much more anxious and emotional we'll be about being socially clumsy because we've got less than 6 hours sleep. The brain replenishes itself when we sleep. The brain drains itself of chemicals of fatigue when we sleep. We've got less immune cells the next day if we experience less than 6 hours sleep. Higher blood pressure, higher blood sugar the next day. So how do we get more sleep? Well, one of the most important ways is to understand our chronotype. This is the time when we naturally feel sleepy. It's different for all of us. Some of us are larks. We fall asleep early in the evening and wake up early in the morning. Some of us fall asleep late and wake up late. And some of us are halfway between those two. That's genetic, our chronotype. So knowing the point at which we're maximally sleepy in the evening, so we're nodding off in front of Netflix, that's really important to know. So we're in bed at that time because we'll be asleep within 15, 20 minutes of that moment arriving. So it's really important to make sure that we're protecting that sleep space. We're carrying out something called sleep hygiene, making sure the bedroom is dark and cool, and that we're going to bed at a point that matches our circadian rhythm when melatonin is released. And this stuff, sleep pressure, which is caused by a chemical called adenosine, which builds up in the gaps between our neurons, the synapses, and that sends us to sleep as well. Adenosine is that scratchy-eyed feeling at the end of the day. It's really important to make sure that we're sleeping within a natural sleep stride, which is natural for us. The point of maximum sleepiness, 7 to 9 hours later, waking up, and we get into a rhythm. We can't bank sleep. We shouldn't need to lay in. We should set an alarm to get us to bed at the same time at that point of maximum sleepiness. We should reduce our caffeine intake after 1 p.m. so caffeine doesn't affect our sleep pressure, but caffeine stops adenosine building up in the synapses, and then we don't feel as fatigued and we're less likely to fall asleep at the right time. Sleep and memory. We know that the hippocampus, which is a part of our working memory system, repatterns memories overnight. And so if we don't get enough sleep, we don't remember effectively. We've got much less memory available. And already we've come across the idea that the brain dumps 70% of its remembered experiences from the previous day. So if we don't get enough sleep, we're making that situation even worse. That's why it's so important that young people and parents know about this stuff. 70% of our immune cells are built at night. So it's really important to get enough sleep for that. And the upsetting news about alcohol is alcohol destroys REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, dreaming sleep. So we need to keep our alcohol consumption away from bedtime, because alcohol will destroy REM sleep. So we don't fall asleep with alcohol. We go into sedation. And eventually, when the alcohol's been physiologically processed by our body, do we get sleep then? So think about alcohol and think about bedtime. There needs to be a gap of about 4 hours between bedtime and metabolizing alcohol so it doesn't damage our REM sleep. Look at the list of the symptoms of sleep deprivation. Lots of us struggle with our sleep. If that's you, join the web workshop at 4 p.m. on Thursday and we'll chat about that. I'll also send you, do email me, I can send you a sleep sheet with lots of information about how to get more natural sleep. Exercise is another rock. Exercise, brilliant for our body, but fantastic for our brain. This is a neuron experiencing BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a hormone that our brain makes when we exercise. And that means that there are more connections possible for a particular neuron, connecting our prefrontal cortex and the rest of our brain, giving us more mental bandwidth, more cognitive and emotional agility. So exercise is really important for our bodies and our brains. And the final rock we're going to look at with a bit of detail is emotions. Emotions are fundamentally important to learning, because we know now that if we don't notice, accept, and share emotions, and we also know that we've got more negative emotions than positive emotions, because negative emotions kept our ancestors alive. Happy, joyful cave people didn't get to live very long because they were too busy smiling at flowers and enjoying the fluffy clouds to notice the predator that ate them, and they didn't get to pass on their happy, joyful genes to the next generation. So we're all evolved from nervous cave people that stayed in the cave. We know now that emotional and physical pain is registered in the same area of the brain. This area, the anterior cingulate cortex between the neocortex and the limbic system. So if we don't clear our emotions out every day, if we don't process our emotional experiences, and that means noticing them and being aware of them and sharing them, particularly the troubling ones, with people that we trust, then that's going to affect our cognitive ability. Imagine trying to do a test experiencing toothache. The same impact on cognition is experienced if we're suffering and carrying emotional pain. So this phrase, "sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me," is not true. Emotional abuse does impact on us enormously. We know that intuitively, but we now know that it impacts on the brain, and we know why it impacts on our cognition and our experiences. So what our brains need to be able to do is name the experience to tame the experience. A conversation between our prefrontal cortex and our emotional system. We dress our emotional pain with words. And how do we do that every day? How do we carry out this process of raising our emotional awareness and our emotional hygiene? We'll look at this in one of the later webinars. It's basically asking ourselves the question, what went well today? Why? How did it make me feel? What emotions were involved? What didn't go well today? Why? How did that make me feel? And what emotions were involved? That is a conversation between two areas of the brain, and brains that can name their emotional experiences can accept them more effectively and move on from them more quickly. If we don't do that, we can clog up that area of the brain with emotional pain. So those are the rocks, the 12 rocks of well-being. Have a look at that list. They're mandatory. You can do some at the same time. Walk outside while allowing your mind to wander, while listening to music. That's 3 at once. And the homework is to try and do your rocks every day. Look at that list. Follow us on social media. You'll see that list. Try to do your rocks every day. And the second aspect of the homework is particularly thinking about Thursday and our meeting online. Think about choosing 2 rocks that you want to improve and expand in your life. Do you want to build an exercise habit? Do you want to eat more healthily? Do you want to start developing a mindfulness habit? Do you want to improve your sleep? Whatever it is, look at that list and choose 2 that you want to work on. And if you've got any questions about any tips or hints that you need, do join that conversation at 4 o'clock on Thursday. Also, this recorded webinar will be available via our website, and you can access that website. There are public pages, particularly focusing on the rocks, so you can have a look at those as well. So thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday at 4 o'clock. We've just got a last inspiring video before we wrap up.
Well, the story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, of poverty and plenty, back before we understood why hindsight's 2020. You see, the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got much bigger than we ever could have planned. We'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick. You could have anything you dreamed of in a day, and with a click. We noticed families had stopped talking. That's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted, and the work-life balance broke. And the children's eyes grew squarer, and every toddler had a phone. They filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise, they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker, till you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below, we filled our cars. We'd drive around all day in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic, because our waste was never capped, until each day when you went fishing, you'd pull them out, already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why. it's best to not upset the lobbies. More convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. But while we all were hidden, amidst the fear, and all the while, the people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you, and calling up their mums. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe, and the beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing, some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure, and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we'd left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new, and every simple act of kindness was now given its due.
But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Well, sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow, and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many. But that's the story of how it started, and why hindsight's 2020.
So we're on this paradigm shift. We're on this journey. Any questions? Have a think about that, and I'll see you Thursday at 4 p.m. That's us. Don't worry about that homework. Do your rocks and identifying 2 rocks. It's not compulsory. There are no detentions. And we'll be getting together at 4 p.m. on Thursday for 15 to 30 minutes, just looking at how to support you in building well-being as a skill into your daily life as a teacher, so you are the best teacher possible and you can support your students to be the same. Next week, we're going to be looking at how we can live positively in a negatively biased brain, and that will go as a recording at 4 p.m. on Monday. And every single time we get together, there'll be a key idea maxim. And for this one, well-being is a skill. We all need to learn, and we need to teach our kids to do this as well. We need to learn that we will get tired and that we need to rest, not give up. Thanks for listening. See you all on Thursday.